Yeah.
Now I see my friend Igor is here too. Hello, Igor. Good to see you.
Hello. I'm writing you a message.
Thank you.
Друзі, хто доєднався, будь ласка, якщо ви не розумієте англійську мову, в Zoom, в меню, будь ласка, виберіть Globus Interpretation, так? І там виберіть собі French, французьку. Ну, насправді там просто в переліку немає української, тому вибирайте French. І в той момент, коли Йохан почне говорити після Сергія... Сергій, будь ласка, перемотай на перший слайд презентацію. Ось так, да. Тобто спочатку у нас говоритиме Сергій, а коли прийде черга Йохана, то тоді наш перекладач синхронний, його переклад зможуть почути лише ті, хто включать в Interpretation French Language, да? От.
Вже 19:00. Все ж таки, Ігоре, я хочу скористатися цією можливістю наживо домовитись про зустріч і спілкування. Бо я про вас дізнався від Йохана. І коли побачив список ваших наукових статей, зрозумів, що я щось пропустив тут в Україні.
Я також.
Да, стосовно досліджень. Тому, з вашого дозволу, там якось або через Юру, або через e-mail обміняємось. Я буду з понеділка в Києві. А ви в Києві?
Так.
Все, дякую.
Чудово. Давайте... Зараз нас 27 учасників, реєструвалося 70 приблизно. Я пропоную так, коли нас стане або 30, і ми тоді почнемо, або буде, наприклад, 7:03, і тоді ми почнемо. Нормально так, друзі?
Давай, коли ти скажеш, тоді ми почнемо.
Ну, добре. Так. Ще трошечки. Але я дуже радий, що стільки людей дослухались до прохання і долучилися до 7 години. Це дуже класно. Це пунктуальність і так значно зручніше працювати всім разом. Привіталися в чаті, чудово. 28. Ще двоє.
Right now I'm not getting any translation. But maybe it hasn't started.
Даніел,
Okay.
Йохан, окей.
Yes, so that I know it, okay.
28, 29. Johan, we are waiting for one more person and then we will start, okay? 30. Окей, so, друзі, давайте тоді починати. Слава Гіпіч. Окей, все. Окей, друзі, починаємо. Дякую, що прийшли. Сьогоднішня подія в нас організована за участі кількох партнерів. Я думаю, що Сергій зараз зможе розповісти трошки про це і взагалі вступне слово зробити і пояснити важливість події цієї статті і взагалі навіть цього переліку статей, які ми плануємо обговорювати в серії семінарів. Сергій, прошу.
Дякую. Добрий вечір, друзі. Сергій Чумаченко, співзасновник української мережі білдингу та першої народної вищої школи в Україні. І перш за все я хочу подякувати всім, хто в цей непростий час знайшов можливість доєднатися до цієї події, бо з моєї точки зору вона надважлива, ця подія, і вона відкриває важливі можливості для нас, для українського суспільства в найближчому майбутньому. Тому дякую за ваш час, за вашу увагу і маю надію, що пропозиція Йохана про проведення перших 3 майстер-класів, воркшопів або семінарів, як завгодно їх можна назвати, стосовно методології народних вищих шкіл, принаймні не менше людей буде приймати участь у всіх 3 заходах, бо дійсно те, що запропонував Йохан Льовґрен, це така можливість побачити унікальні особливості цього виду освіти, і він дійсно унікальний у світі, з точки зору скандинавів, і зрозуміти, чому досі на протязі 170 років він вважається надважливим для розвитку демократії, розвитку суспільства в країнах Північної Європи. Друзі, я хочу щиро подякувати Йохану Льовґрену за те, що він підставив плече цей складний час для нас, для українського суспільства, і дійсно робить все, що необхідно для того, щоб у нас була можливість знати якомога більше про фолькбілдинг, про цю культуру, про інфраструктуру, про методологію народних вищих шкіл. Я дякую університету Південно-Східної Норвегії, професором якого він є, і дякую колегам Йохана Льовґрена по глобальній мережі дослідників руху народних вищих шкіл. Ми вже багато спілкувалися, і ці перші 3 семінари – це тільки початок такої довгої історії, коли наші скандинавські партнери будуть нашими провідниками і менторами в розумінні методології народних вищих шкіл, кружків самонавчання і всіх інших форм, притаманних цьому руху. Я дуже вдячний Сарі Мортенсон і Данській асоціації народних вищих шкіл за те, що вона теж постійно підтримує з нами зв'язок і робить багато для того, щоб українці мали можливість цей час навчатись в данських народних вищих школах. А те, що стосується цих семінарів, завдяки Сарі, ми маємо дозвіл від авторів статей в збірнику 11 книг про методологію народних вищих шкіл, про переклад, публікації і обговорення цих статей в Україні. Дорогі наші скандинавські партнери, дякую за те, що з першого дня цього повномасштабного вторгнення ви разом з нами і робите все для того, щоб ми могли розвивати своє українське суспільство. До речі, колеги, друзі українці, я хочу звернути увагу на те, що все, що робить Йохан, його колеги, його партнери в цьому проєкті, це абсолютно безкоштовно. І це дійсно така ознака духу фолькбілдингу, духу цього руху просвіти скандинавських країн, коли ніхто не чекає. Люди, які мають знання, не чекають гроші для того, щоб прийти до людей, яким потрібні знання. І багато про це розповідає в Україні, багато звертає до того, що ті, хто мають знання важливі для розвитку суспільства, не чекали фінансової підтримки для цього. Якщо можемо, треба йти і в села, і в міста, створювати школи, створювати гуртки і розносити цю просвіту, яка змінить українське суспільство. А це, друзі, надважливо. Вчора в госпіталі в Харкові мав можливість поспілкуватися з пораненим. Це друг сина. Син попросив завести йому там одяг, продукти. Це чоловік десь 45-50 років з першого дня, з 24 лютого. Він в українській армії, і коли вчора у нього сильна дуже контузія, це видно і по обличчю, і по тому, як він розмовляє, але то, що мене торкнуло до сльоз, це те, як він говорив про майбутнє України. Він настільки впевнений в тому, що ми зможемо створити нову Україну, що він мене просто надихнув на те, щоб продовжувати всю цю історію. Я не буду забирати час у Йохана, тому що краще про статтю говорити з автором. Я хочу ще раз звернути увагу на те, що це перша зустріч з автором наукової статті на цю тему за 7 років, скільки ми досліджуємо цей рух в скандинавських країнах. Йохан, дякую тобі дуже. Ми домовились про те, що Johan, the floor for you.
Yuri, is it my time to share, or is there more information?
As far as understood, Sergey not completed yet. Please wait a little bit. Okay. Да, Сергій.
That's what I thought. Yeah. That's what I thought. It's okay.
Ага. Юра, підхвати, будь ласка, бо мені треба на хвилинку відійти.
Ага, добре, я зараз підхоплю. Друзі, тут виходить, що насправді є збірник з 11 книг про народні вищі школи. Зараз ми дали вам прочитати переклад першої статті лише з однієї з цих книг, так? Саме завдяки тому, що Йохан пішов нам на зустріч, і він першим запропонував перекласти українською його статтю, і якраз ми з неї почнемо. Так, про Йохана Сергій вже сказав, і я бачу, що Йохан нам якби щиро допомагає розібратися в темі народних вищих шкіл, і навіть під час перекладу в нас з Іриною виникло ряд питань щодо правильності перекладання термінів, і ми разом з Йоханом їх уточнювали. Так.
Я готовий взяти слово.
Давай.
Ага. Друзі, стосовно Йохана ще декілька слів. Він не просто теоретик цієї справи, а він дійсно людина, яка пройшла всі щаблі і має дуже великий досвід роботи в багатьох народних вищих школах. Він практик, який потім свій досвід втілив в наукові дослідження і в наукові статті. Тому ще більш цінна та інформація, якою він може поділитись. Ми працюємо наступним чином. Ми домовились з Йоханом, що він буде мати 25 хвилин на презентацію, але за 3 хвилини до початку все ж таки подумали, що не будемо обмежувати Йохана в можливості розповідати, бо це перша така велика скандинавська розповідь вживу, можна сказати, про народні вищі школи. Тому скільки треба, стільки Йохан буде розповідати. Після цього буде можливість задати йому питання. Поки буде свіжий матеріал, свіжа можливість спитати, задати якісь питання, він буде відповідати на ці питання. І тільки після того, як ми обговоримо такі перше враження від його виступу, ми підемо в кімнати для обговорення в групах вже цієї статті. Там є 3 такі підказки, що обговорювати. Насправді ми не хочемо обмежувати вас в питаннях, які ви можете обговорювати в групах, бо стаття насправді це така ретроспектива багаторічного дослідження Йохана Льовґрена, і питання можуть бути які завгодно. Але якщо виникнуть якісь проблеми, що обговорювати, то тут є підказка, і я вважаю, що це такі ключові меседжі цієї статті, про них можна поговорити. Дякую дуже, і я готовий віддати слово Йохану.
Johan, you're welcome.
Thank you, Sergey, and thank you for the introduction. I will bring with you to a presentation of some of the examples that were given in the book and some of the concepts that are going on. I'm not following the book structure strictly, but I'm trying to think what we need to talk about and what could be fruitful for us to think about in the situation right now. The book is called Learn Together, and it's a part of a 10-book series, or actually 11-book series on the folk high schools in Denmark. I'm a little bit proud because all the other authors are Danish. So I'm the only non-Danish author that was invited to write. I work a lot with folk high schools in both Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, where I live, and Finland, but also with schools connected to the folk high school movement, the Nordic folk high schools movement around the world. We are counting on 400 folk high schools in the Nordic region, and a Danish researcher found 700 schools connected to the basic ideas of Grundtvig and to the Danish folk high schools all over the world. Maybe the most famous of these are Highlander Folk High School in the US, where where Martin Luther King and Rosa Parker went to study, and which was actually the base of the human rights movement in the 60s and 70s in the US. And it's still active. I'm still working together with the teachers and the administration from Highlander. They were actually they were arsoned by white supremacy. So they are thought of as a challenge to the non-democratic parts of American society. And the headmaster saw that as honor, that they actually were still so seen as enemies. My background is I studied theology in my youth and became a teacher at the folk high school, at Brennan Folk High School. I have 25 years as a folk high school teacher, but half of that time I've doubled it with teaching or researching as an academic. And I got my PhD in 2018 for a thesis called The Reflective Community Learning Processes in the Norwegian Folk High Schools. And the presentation today is very much based on my PhD. For those of you who have worked with that kind of work, you know that it's hard because you have all these concepts with you that you have worked with. So I was a little bit embarrassed when I read the book again and saw that all these very theoretical concepts were connected. I will tell you a little bit why I think that's important and why, as a practitioner and a person who actually have been there for many, many years and lived together with young people at the folk high school, why I think that these theories are important and why I think that we need to do this. We need to actually pull back so far that we use pretty advanced theoretical language to describe what happens in the folk high schools. But when I am here and when I'm learning to know Yuri and Elena and the team that has been translating, and Sergey and Anastasia, then I have to also tell you that I have been traveling to Moldova for many years. As a part of my work as a folk high school teacher, I organized support for human development in Moldova, for community centers and young children's both soup kitchen and children's after school activities. So I've actually been to Moldova 13 or 14 times through the years. So I feel I've also been to Ukraine in these travels. And I know that there's a big difference between Moldova and Ukraine, but it's the same region and much of the same history. And I feel like that also gives me I hope, some connection to the situation in Ukraine today. Also, I've had long talks with Yuri about the translation and about different parts of it. So I feel like, Yuri, you've been my teacher. And I have to say also that the whole project has, for me, been not only a great honor to work with you, but also a great learning experience. Maybe it is when we see our own pedagogy or our own philosophy, how it can connect to another cultural situation and geographic and political situation. Maybe that's when we really understand it. And I feel I learn a lot through the dialogues we have had. So thank you, Yuri, and thank you, Sergey and Anastasia and Elena, for the dialogues we have had. Why then should we theory? Why all these theories? Why do I need to evoke philosophers and the researchers and sociologists? I think theories will help us to understand better. I think we can understand ourselves and what we do and our ideals. And it's been important for the Norwegian folk high schools to connect to academia to help get an understanding. Also, I am leading the teachers' education for folk high schools in Norway. And that is a place where we work with these theories and try to be even better at what we do, and to be more focused on the democratic Bildung and on the processes that we are talking about. So by analyzing them, we can be better at doing them. I also think that by connecting to these theories and explaining, we can create respect for what's happening in the folk high schools. Sergei, when you talked a little bit before we started today, you talked about the problem of describing what folk high schools actually do. Because it's not, Bildung is not something that turns up on a statistic. It's not something that you easily prove by, numbers. You have to go very close to the person who is going through the process of Bildung to make the Bildung be seen, to make it available. And therefore, I think it's really important that we are researchers who come from the folk high school and know the folk high school and love the folk high school, to do this research and can show what is happening there and lift it up. Also, that is why we are looking for theories that mirror what we do in the folk high schools, that actually show what we are doing. Please give me a sign, Yuri, if I'm too fast. I get a bit engaged and then I maybe start talking too fast.
Daniel, okay? Is it okay? I think it's a better question to Daniel.
Just show me. I just do like that and I'll cool down. Okay. What is really interesting in working with Sergei and Yuri and with the Ukrainian Building Network is also to see that if we are going to help support development, new developments, and see folk high schools actualized in other cultural and political settings, then too, it's important to go back, see what the bases are, what the basic ideas are, and bring them on. Because we have talked about this a lot, it can never be a copy. You can never copy something exactly from one situation to the other. There are so many factors that will shape what the needs are and what the possibilities are in different cultural situations. And when we see the 700 folk high schools and folk high schools connected educational systems or schools around the world, they're very, very different, but they have the same basic philosophy and the same basic idea of what we are doing, what we are aiming at with our education. So that's really important, that these concepts can help us have a larger picture that will help us to also start new developments. And that's maybe the most exciting thing about this project and about what we are doing together, to try to see, is there something here that can support the development of democracy in Ukraine now and when you have won the war, as Yuri says all the time, when we have won the war. So I will bring you on to some of the ideas about democracy and why this is something that can support democracy. When we look at philosophers that have analyzed democracy through the years, all the way from Hegel and Kant to Biesta and Gustafsson, as I quote in the article, that are more modern, we see that when you're trying to see what is actually the basis, what is the fundament in us as a person of being a democratic person, you end up talking about a subject-to-subject communication. It's not a subject-to-object. It's not from a person that are above you to a person that are below you, but it's two people equally standing, and the teacher becomes a person who is listening as well as teaching in a school situation. So what is the aim? What can democratic building and democratic education have as an aim? And I think that's important to see why these theories could be a way to understand what the folk high school pedagogy is about. It is to say that they are. It's the ability to identify with the other, the ability to see yourself in the other and the other in yourself. That is where democracy starts. So if a young person is to become a democratic person throughout his or her life, the first things we need to do is to give them an ability to be present in another person and to see themselves in the other person and the other person in themselves. It's a process of, you could say, identification. We will use that word in another way later on, but you have to identify, you have to feel with, you have to empathize with the person to actually be able to become a truly democratic person. So if we aim at this, if we aim at making students grow in their ability to identify with the other, to see themselves in the other, what kind of ideas can we use? And I really spent a lot of time reading different ideas about learning and philosophies about learning to see what can mirror, what can show me what I know happens in the folk high schools, both from my experience and in my empirical research where I have studied and mainly I have, especially in the studies behind this book, I have mainly listened to students, have asked them to write me text about what they have experienced at the folk high schools, interviewed them, observed their practices, and been in the school as a researcher. And then I asked what kind of theories. And in modern learning theory, there is a movement. And before the 70s, 80s, much of the research was focused on learning as something that happens in the mind. How does the mind of the individual perceive learning? And theoreticians like Piaget or other learning theorists from the more early years would try to analyze how the mind develops. And of course, that's important. But if we look at the folk high schools, that is not the only purpose of education. We want to develop minds, but we also have a much wider focus. Etienne Wenger, who has the theories about the communities of practice that I have used here, and that are the basic theory that has been used in this book. He started or established, defined a theory about learning that has the community, the social, at the center. So they moved the focus of this research from the mind to the community. And when we try to understand what's happening in the folk high schools, and when I listen to what the students say, because when I tried to analyze all this material, there were two basic things that all the time came back. It was the students' experience of a community where they felt that they could be themselves, where they had unique friendships. And then the second was their own development, to become more the one I am, to become more myself. So I'm going to bring with you to some of these concepts and why they are important in the understanding of folk high school learning and folk high school pedagogy. When Etienne Wenger talks about the community and what happens in a learning community, because his thesis, his main idea is that all learning is actually social. You always relate to somebody. So the learning happens in a social setting. And our main learning and our main identity is based in 2 or 3 or 4 basic communities that we belong to. At least that's what he would say is the traditional way of learning. And maybe the 21st century has brought us to another place. We will come to that. But basically, so I have copied the Ukrainian text here from one of the citations where a student is talking about her learning in the folk high schools. And she's talking about how it could almost look like a holiday camp, because it's such a nice place and they all have their, you know, they have a lot of games, a lot of fun together. But she says, at the same time, I have never worked as hard as I do here. Etienne Wenger would say that learning is based on the negotiation of identity. All learning has to do with our identity, who we are. That's the true learning. That's what shapes us and makes us into who we are. And we would both, as a community and as individuals, negotiate. So it's a word that almost sounds like somebody sitting at a table trying to find the next office building, or the next the cost of a service that you're going to buy. It's negotiation. How much? And in the same way, we kind of see, do I want to be a part of this? Do I really want this? What would be the meaning? And as a community, meaning becomes very important. Why are we here? Why are we together? Like today, why are we here? Why are we starting this community around folk high school pedagogy? What is the meaning? And we are all the time, like you were listening or we are talking, we are all the time thinking, now, what is the meaning of this? What is the purpose? Should I identify this very much? Should it envelop me, be one of my basic communities? Should I be a little bit a part of it? Or should I be, and I hope nobody does that, should I pull out? So we are all the time negotiating when we meet different communities and when we meet different, and this negotiation can, by us as teachers and pedagogues, can be intensified. We can help students end up in situations where they have to negotiate. And there are a key here to processes that can create a democracy and then a democratic mind, because the negotiation is a place where you're actually moving a little bit towards the limit of towards the boundary, towards the limit of your community, towards the limit of where you're safe and what is yours, and you look into another way of being. Like in the folk high schools, when these young people say, I'm sharing a room with a boy who grew up with parents who were drug addicts, and he has been on the limit of killing himself. He has been really, really, really depressed. It's something that never been a part of my life, but I have so much more respect now. And this is not just one student, that was an extreme example, but it's not just one student that talks about this as the most important learning experience in their folk high school year, that they actually met somebody very different, identified with them, and saw themselves in them. Another concept that we will use is the concept of learning trajectory. Wenger and Love starts with the apprenticeship learning as a social learning model. They are later criticized because this is kind of 19th century. It's not happening so much today. It could happen and we could use it. But in a learning, in an apprenticeship situation, you have a master who is teaching, like these who are making shoes or cobblers. He's teaching a right way to do it. He has the master's knowledge and he has a very clear goal and he has a learning trajectory. It's like when you shoot an arrow and it flows away, it follows a trajectory, and he has a learning that is pointing towards something very clearly, towards a goal. And the goal is clearly identified. The little boy is one day going to be a cobbler master himself, and he's going to be a master in making shoes. So this is the very, you could say, simple reproductive learning, where you're learning exactly. But the idea of a learning trajectory, of a way, a path to learn, or a direction for the learning will come back, because that's an important part when we are to understand how this is different from folk high school pedagogy. Not different in the sense that this does not happen, but we also have other goals that are not maybe in the same way present in the apprenticeship metaphor. We could talk about folk high school pedagogy as a boundary-oriented pedagogy. That's one of the when Etienne Wenger is developing his ideas about pedagogy and learning, that's one of the last things he has now published. Is the idea of a boundary-oriented pedagogy. It would mean that we would lead our students into situations where they have to face a community or an understanding that is another and their own, that there are outside the boundaries, so we lead them to the boundaries. At the boundaries, the negotiation of identity is intensified. That's one of the basic truths or principles of this learning theory. So we are leading them towards the boundary to intensify their learning situation and to make them understand something else. I could bring you back to an earlier picture where you saw me in Moldova. One of the ideas with this project, where we brought Norwegian young people to Moldova and to community centers there, I have to say too that we worked a lot with the respect of the situations. We didn't want to be, some kind of tourists that just came in and watched. We were making relationships, and I have many friends from my years in Moldova, and it was very much so an equal meeting, and as much as we could. But I remember meeting two boys, tough boys. They were they were on the soccer team in our school, and they were very well trained and very hard with themselves. And I came to the community center, and they had ended up there a little bit before me, and they were crying. They were sitting in the corner of the community center crying, and I said, what has happened? And they were telling me about meeting this grandfather who took care of a little boy of 5 years old, and you would have seen the same kind of situation where the family had moved to the West and to do work, and the little boy had been left with his grandfather, and he had no shoes on his feet, and the floor was cold, and the house was not very well insulated, and the whole idea of that was to bring them to understand, to see themselves, to respect the situation, and to engage. And I see many of these still are engaged in supporting families in Moldova because they have been there and they have had to negotiate their identity in relationship to another world that is not what they are used to in the much more affluent Norwegian society. And also to respect and understand that when we go back to where the folk high school started in the 19th century, Norway and Sweden and Denmark were the poor, at least Norway and Sweden were some of the poorest in Europe. And then Ukraine and Moldova were not poor in the same way. So there has been a time of poverty in Sweden and Norway too. And the whole understanding of what poverty is, I think that was very important about democracy and about growing as a democratic person. The whole building of this book ends up in these three categories, and Sergei, you asked me to say something about them. And there are many concepts woven together in this illustration that we will end up in. And I will just use some time to say something about these, because this is a way of trying to describe the learning and the fullness of the learning in the folk high schools, where we can talk about the first column of reproductive learning. And that's the kind of learning where you have a master, like you see in the next to the bottom. Who is the teacher? He is the master. He's the one who has the knowledge. It could be a grammar lesson, learning how to speak Spanish, or it could be a lesson in the. I know when the folk high school started in Scandinavia, they actually trained how to do a meeting, in a political meeting. So they trained to be the one with the club and the secretary and the different roles, and they learned the processes to be able to engage in the democratic process. And they will always be learning that is reproductive, where we have a teacher who has the knowledge, and the students attain that knowledge through copying what the knowledge is. It's you could call it a monological. We haven't looked at monologue and dialogue, but I think those are concepts that most of us know before. But you could talk about that it's a knowledge that actually, in a sense, is monological. Still, even if you do it in a kind of dialogical setting, the basic knowledge passes from a master to a student. It has a clear substance. There is something that can be concretely, and that this is the kind of education, like we talked about, Sergei, that is measurable. It's easy to do. And when they do the big global educational tests, or the European educational tests like PISA or something, they go in and they do tests and they evaluate how much do the student know exactly, because they can measure the reproductive learning. The danger with that kind of measurement of education, I don't say that that's wrong, but the danger that we should know is that it leaves out the whole building, the whole rest of the learning. It's a learning that follows. We had inbound trajectory, simple trajectory of the master and the apprentice, and it has a clear, simple learning trajectory that follows a line. You have to learn this and this and this and this to be able to speak Spanish, or you have to learn this and this and this to be able to solve this kind of equation in mathematics. So there are learning, and there will always be learning that needs to be reproductive, in a sense. And the learner is moving, like here, from the periphery of knowledge of a community into the central. So you can be more and more in control of the learning that that community earns. The second kind is a very important part of democratic learning. I would call it questioning values, where you learn not to just accept what the teacher says. And my understanding of the schooling during the communist years and during the Soviet Union was that it became very clear what you should think, and you were told what was right and what was wrong. This is the actual knowledge, and it was a reproductive learning, also about politics, also about philosophy. Whereas in a questioning values kind of learning, you have the right to think yourself, and the whole idea is for the teacher to make the student think, to challenge thoughts, and it doesn't have a right or wrong, not necessarily. It's opening up for discussion, and it helps us to understand and to take different viewpoints and try them out. It could be an in or outbound. It could be knowledge that could go many ways. The whole idea is to make a process. It's the content. The whole center of the learning is not an actual learning substance, but it's the process, it's the happening, it's the thinking, it's the reflection, the critical thinking, and the individual mind, the freedom of the individual mind that is in the center of this learning. The teacher's role is not that of a master anymore, but it's a catalyst. You just make the students start thinking. You bring them into a situation where they need to negotiate their identity, where you force them, but put them in a situation where they can choose to start a process of negotiation. And the learning here has very much to do with tolerance and respect, with the ability to let go of yourself and think in another way, to be critical and not to buy simple solutions. And I think we can talk about the situation in Ukraine, and I know Sergei put a little heart in his response now, because this is really important, I think, in your way of thinking. But I also think of the situation in America or in the US. We have contacts in Brazil. In Norway and Sweden, there are political groups that are growing that says you shouldn't think for yourself. This is the truth. This is how you should think. And that's always a danger. We never earn Bildung. We never earn a free society of folkbilding or folkbildung. We always have to renew it. And it's always challenged. And the danger of simplifying and of limiting the critical thinking is always there. And I think especially in times where there is much movement, where there is much happening, like the climate changes, the immigration possibilities that are challenges for our societies, they will make it even more important for us to keep up the critical thinking and to learn young people to think critically and think for themselves and find the truth by their own thinking and not buying it cheaply. Still, I would say that maybe the most interesting way of thinking about learning is the last one, the embodying of values. Because I think the folk high schools were almost made for this kind of learning. In Norway and Denmark, and also in Sweden and Finland, somewhat, but not to the same extent. But the schools are not governed by a set curriculum. They don't have exams, and they don't have grades. So as a folk high school teacher, the only way I could make my students work were by initiating them, by finding out who they were and start a dialogue. That was a great challenge as a folk high school teacher, to be able to find how can I engage them, how can I make them think and make them want to go to the boundary and to start a negotiation and to have a boundary experience. What we see is that this kind of learning, where you meet somebody who stands for something, who has values, and I think this is so important, that there are one kind of values that you only learn by meeting somebody who actually carry these values. So the embodied values are embodied because they have to be carried by somebody, and deeply carried, a part of the identity of somebody who you meet. It comes to us by a lived example. So the teacher will be a lived example. They will have to stand with their whole being for the kind of values that they want their students to learn. It's the whole content is process oriented. It is a content. We can't say that, like we can say in the questioning values, where we say there is no actual content, it's only the movement. Because when we meet students and we say, okay, it's okay, we can discuss many things, but there is a climate change and we have to understand that humanity is a part of it. Or we will say, it's okay to discuss many things, but I will stand for that democracy is the best way of ruling a society. And I don't think that any movement toward autocracy is a better way of doing things. We can stand for values by who we are, and we will give them on to our students. It's a substance, but it's process oriented. And why it's so hard, Sergei, to capture it and to measure it is because it doesn't have a coherence. You're not able to catch it. You can't get a hold of it because it will slip from you, because it comes and goes. It comes up in situations. I would sit on the train from Bucharest to Chisinau, and suddenly a student would start talking about deep things in life, about values, and about things that has to do very much so with democratic thinking. And we would talk for an hour, 2 hours about those things in a situation where I had not expected it, where I can make a class about the same issues, and the student will just not be engaged in that situation. So we don't know where this happens. We can have pedagogical plans that are making it possible, that makes it more likely to happen, and we will move the students towards a place of negotiating identity and of meeting these values. But we can never own it 100%. And that's maybe the scary thing also with this. We are doing a study now on the Nordic folk high school teacher. The book just came out this summer. And one of the things that are common for all of them is they're saying, this is scary. I have to deal with a chaotic situation where I don't have 100% control of what they actually are learning. It's not like a math class where I can have a test in the end of the hour and say, okay, you learned this and this and this. But it's about personal development, and it's so much more unchartable for us, and it's a very great challenge for us as researchers to lift that up, that knowledge. So these were the 3 ways of thinking about values. There are many things I could comment on in this book. But I think I will leave it there, and I think I used my 25 minutes and more than that. So I hope it's okay. I'm glad that Sergey gave me a little bit leeway in using more time. So over to you.
Друзі, як і домовлялися.
Друзі, ми переходимо до запитань до Йохана. Все ж таки скористаюсь правом, тому що я тут нібито модератор цього процесу, і хочу від щирого серця сказати тобі дякую, Йохане, бо ти зацепив найважливіші речі, які дуже складно українцю розповісти про скандинавську освіту у народних вищих школах. Дякую за це. У нас є перше запитання. Давайте домовимося, що ви запитання можете писати або в чаті, або задавати голосом, піднімаєте руку в реакціях, там, або піднімаєте руку вживу і задаєте питання Йохану. Поки є перше питання, я зачитаю українською, Йохан тобі Даніель перекладе. Добрий день, не володію вільно англійською, тож пишу своє питання українською та заздалегідь. Коли ми говоримо про 3 моделі навчання, чи правильно я розумію, що це стосується саме гуманітарного навчання, саме про цінності, про ідентичність, про демократію тощо. Тобто, головним об'єктом освіти в народних вищих школах буде людина та суспільство. Бо я так розумію, що згадувані вищі приклади про математику або майстра з ремонту взуття не можна навчити за допомогою діалогу та рефлексії.
Should I answer? Do you want me to say something about it? Okay.
Я не чую Йохана.
Yes, Johan, please. So
I think I understood the question. I think it's important to see that the 2 kind of extra, the questioning of values and the embodiment of values in this diagram are not excluding the first one. So in a folk high schools, we will do all the three of them. I know, Sergey, that you worked on a psychology teaching at the folk high schools for help workers, for workers that worked as in the health service in the war. And of course, it's almost a post-traumatic. I think it's very, very, very important. There are actual knowledge parts in that work. There are things that we need to teach that are reproductive, that are a knowledge about the way we react in a crisis, the way we react when we see people who are badly hurt or dead. But then there are also the free talking, the sharing of experiences where you are free to just, be critical about the situation you were in. Why didn't I get the support I was expecting? And maybe you have to say things that are not very well balanced, or you have reactions afterwards. So it's important to have the second part where we are allowed to just, and where the teacher maybe just says, okay, talk on, just how did that affect you? And then your catalyst, you just help them to release these feelings and these thoughts. But it also, I think, is a place where you need to have values that are embodied, where we need to meet somebody that has been through a process of post-traumatic therapy, that are safe in themselves and that can help you through that process. And some of the values you learn in such a process are through meeting them in another person, embodied in another person. But also in the Nordic folk high schools, we would have, when I had philosophy, I would tell them about Kierkegaard or about Habermas or Nietzsche, and we would explain. I would be the teacher to tell them about these theories, but then we would discuss them, and then we would think about them together. And somebody would say, "Oh, I like Nietzsche. God is dead," and then somebody would say, "No," and then they would, think freely about this any way they wanted, but use the theories. And in all of it, I would be there and I would say, I believe in God, but it's okay to think exactly what you want. And I'm not going to tell you to think like me. I used to tell them, whatever you do, don't think like me. That would be a waste. You have to find this in yourself, and it will never be a copy of what I do, but you have to find it in yourself. So all these three are activated in that, because they would both have the concrete knowledge of how Nietzsche would think. They would have the discussion where they could think any way they wanted and agree in 1 minute and then disagree the next and just try it out. And then they could meet me. And I would say, I'm giving you total freedom. I'm a fully democratic person. I will not steer the way you think, but I want you to think. And you have to take a decision. You have to find this in yourself and have your own mind. And so they have all the three parts in those classes. And I think that it's hard to imagine a learning situations where when you have the third, you don't have the second and first two. I hope that answered your question.
Maybe a short clarification. So if I'm learning to make boots or shoes, then there will be all three.
Now I'm not getting a translation.
Yeah. You're right.
Yeah, I see. And I don't get it.
Johan, can you hear me now?
It's okay.
Друзі, я просто боюся.
Could you tell Yuri that I don't get his English?
Я не чую спілкування.
I have to turn on the...
Johan, так чутно, да? Can you hear me now?
Do you want to talk to me in English now? Because then I unmute. Okay, then I'll unmute I'll hello, Sergey. Now I'm hearing you.
Sorry, I have trouble on Zoom on my side. I don't hear you in Ukrainian variant. That's why I don't hear your discussion between Yuri, Daniel, and you now. Excuse me, please. Yeah, I see the question from Ksenia Smirnova. I have proposed, Юра. Або я не розумію, або да, прокоментуй. Там Ксенія щось... Є питання чи що?
Ксенія захотіла питання задати,
Do you
так?
help me?
Йохан, can you hear me now or not? Окей. Ті хай Ксенія
I
задає
don't hear you
питання.
now. Now I have to unmute. Okay, now I hear you, Yuri. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, Johan, so just clarification. Can you hear me? Yeah? So if somebody is learning how to make shoes, then all the three types of learning can be there. So first, master teaches me, and then also we can discuss some things which are related to making shoes.
Yeah. So it's and they will all. I think you cannot. They will go parallel in almost every situation. I agree that the shoemaker will probably be a father figure. He will embody values of of being true to your customers, of doing things well, and hopefully democratic values of taking care of your employees and your. So yes, I think all the three. But the apprenticeship has a very clear reproductive part, and that's why it's used. But I agree. It's all the three things can be happening there.
Питання від Ксенії.
Є, чекайте, Лариса.
Should I have the translation now? Or in English?
Бачу вашу руку, у вас є запитання, так?
Да. Хотіла запитати, якщо ми говоримо про те, що немає програми і немає певної структури, то тоді як відбувається підготовка вчителів, які працюють в цих школах? Як їх відбирають, за якими, які повинні бути характеристики вчителя, які підійде, або, може, не всі підійдуть для такої роботи? Що потребує така від вчителя? Як його, по-перше, обирають, чи може він працювати, да? І друге питання, знову ж таки, якщо немає програм і немає структури, як учні обирають школу, до якої вони будуть поступати? Як вони обирають, куди їм саме йти, в ту чи іншу школу? Шкіл багато, як обрати, якщо немає структури і немає програми?
Just making notes here. Maybe I oversimplified. There's absolutely a structure, and when I would start my philosophy class, I would have an idea of what I would do. So I would there is a structure, and we offer courses that are that would be like a soccer or a more philosophical, or they can play chess. There's very definite. My son went to folk high school where he had friluftsliv, where he had outdoor living and the kind of exercises where you go biking and hiking and doing that kind of thing. That's very popular. But there is a program and there is a structure, but it's not imposed by the government. Nobody is saying this is what you have to do, but we have to have a plan, and we have to have a teaching plan. But as for me, when I had been a philosophy teacher for 20 years, I would come into the class and I would have an idea. I would like to present this subject today, but maybe and because we don't have the grades, because I don't have to teach them something special. I could pick up something that happened that day. I could pick up on a political situation, on something that the students were interested in, maybe a movie that just came out, or a series that they are watching that triggered a question that was philosophical. And then we could doing that day. So I would both have my ideas and be open. But there's absolutely a structure. But the structure is open because the government has not imposed a plan. When I was working, I have also worked in the public school. And then I had a plan and I had an exam. So I had to work towards that exam. And if I listened too much to the students and their needs, maybe they wouldn't manage the exam. So that would be, so I would have to follow a more strict, and I was locked into a plan. And I think both things are needed. When we have the folk high school teachers training program, they have an exam and we have a pretty concrete plan because I think that's good too. But when you're young, or when you come to a folk high school and you really need to find yourself and your identity and need to become a more democratic person, the folk high school model, I think, is very, very, gives openness for that, possibility for that. And the other way, well, how do they choose? We present the different courses, the different classes we have, and then you choose. And often you choose something that you think is very important to you. So like my son who went to the wildlife course, he was very interested in that kind of, tough guy. He wanted to have the challenges. Maybe another person would go to drama class or a computer a year where they focus on that. My school just started a chess course where they played chess for a whole year. I would die if I went to that class, but I understand that those kids really like that, and they get to do the thing they love most for a whole year. But they intersperse it with more concrete democratic education. So it's not only those classes, but other classes too.
Мгм.
Johan, can I add something
I hope that
about
was
В чаті є питання для Йохана англійською.
I will speak in Ukrainian, yeah? Okay.
okay.
Лариса, справа в тому, що кожна школа має свій профіль, і предмети, які там є провідними. І в кожній школі є декілька видів курсів. Є там річні курси, наприклад. Є там 4-місячні курси, або місячні, або тижневі. Там є довгі, середні, короткі, є майстер-класи, лекції і багато чого. Але у школи завжди є профіль. Наприклад, є така дуже відома в Данії школа International People College, міжнародний народний коледж. І вони пропонують блоки. От зараз Кена Точиліна там була, вона може трошки більше про це розповісти. І людина обирає блок. Ага, Лена, підхватиш?
And I see the English question, so I have that in front of me if you want me to answer.
Лен?
Так, я можу продовжити. Тож,
Okay, should I read the English question now?
Лена.
Yeah, I will follow up with what Sergey started saying, and then we will switch over
Друзі,
to...
я, наприклад, Лену не чую. Хто чує Лену?
Лена, спробуй ще говорити зараз. Зараз просто потрібно...
Пробую говорити.
Угу.
Зараз чути? Ні? Так? Ага, добре. Окей. Так, в IPC, в International People's College, основний фокус все ж таки це міжнародні відносини. І під цю категорію підпадає дуже багато всього. Тобто там сходяться люди декількох десятків національностей, і їм можуть надавати предмети, які будуть дуже такими теоретичними, хардкоровими, типу post-Soviet studies. Наприклад, я ходила на заняття, де ми вивчали, що там сталося з колишніми республіками Радянського Союзу. І водночас десь паралельно йде йога, і водночас десь паралельно йде the art of slow living, або мистецтво повільного життя. Це коли треба заповільнитись, зробити паузу, піти подихати повітрям тощо. І вони завжди намагаються зробити такий мікс, в якому буде щось хардкорове, буде щось про спорт, обов'язково мистецтво, обов'язково скульптури. Я бачу дуже багато, бо я вже побувала в 3 школах, і в кожній було щось про мистецтво, або малювання, або ліпки дуже багато, ну і спорт, звісно. І те, про що говорить Йохан, я дуже сильно відчула, тому що інколи закрадалось таке питання, ну, тому що я там походжу 2 освіти, все таке фундаментальне. І тут якась дівчинка розповідає про особливості там сексу у підлітків або надання консент з погодження на секс в молодому віці. Що це взагалі? І все це з власного досвіду, нічого академічного. Але потім, вже коли пройшло 3-4 місяці, я побачила, як ці молоді люди з усієї Європи, з Азії, з Америки, і в тому числі 3 українці, плюс я одна, 4. Я побачила, як вся ця молодь почала змінюватись і ставати такими дійсно врівноваженими, вже можна їх було назвати молодими дорослими людьми, а не дітьми, як я їх називала спочатку.
Тоді наступне питання буде від Ірини Чуркіної англійською мовою в чаті. Йохан його вже прочитав.
Did you want me to ask which one? The one that in the chat? Yeah, because in chat it says, how do you overcome the students' fear of the other in the process of developing their ability to identify themselves with another? And I think that's a very good question. And it's in my studies it was almost a core because what we do when we build the community, we try to build a very safe community that are very inclusive. Many times I have met, I'm sure it's the same in Ukraine as in Norway, that some students are cool when they're in high school and some are not cool, and you're in and you're kind of, and some are nerdy and not respected. But I've met so many of those that maybe were outsiders and not respected in their earlier studies that has become, you know, very much a part of the community and respected parts of the community in the folk high school, because what we work on is building a very safe community where nobody is an outsider. It might sound very romantic or unrealistic, but when you really work with that, and that is the focus and the values you are building in the group, and the games you play or the learning classes you have, all build that community. There's so many students that tell that this is a unique experience for me of being safe, of being feeling that I am myself. One of the most usual comments that were when I categorized the interviews and the texts that they wrote to me were becoming 100% myself. So they felt like here I can actually be myself in this community, and that's not something that. It's not just because I love the folk high schools, but it's actually through research that has been found. So that's the way we work. We build a community that is very safe, and in that safe community, the boundary meetings are, you're safe enough to do the boundary meetings. It becomes a part of the community.
Далі питання від
There is another question, Daniel, about education. Should I answer that too?
Юля.
Or should we? I know Julia has been waiting. Yeah, I think she has been waiting for a long time. I think maybe she forgot.
Це треба, щоб Юля говорила в загальний канал.
Да, нічого не чути.
Ну, я думаю, що попросимо Йохана повторити питання.
Julia speaking.
Зараз.
Yes.
Юля, ви чуєте?
Should we say something about education while we're waiting, or should we tell her that we're not listening?
Can you hear me?
О, тепер я можу. Йохан, can you hear? Спробуй в загальний канал казати.
I can't hear. No, but
I
I
don't
can
know
go
what I
down and
can.
open for the... She speak English?
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe I can write.
Sorry, Julia, now I can hear you.
Oh, okay, very well. Okay, thank you very much for your
Just have to
work.
have more...
Can you hear me?
It's very hard to hear what you're saying.
I should speak very, very loud. Yes.
No, it's okay. No, it's okay.
Okay, I try. I want to clarify for myself. How do you implement the values in your folk high school? It's through living together in community, through discussion, through reflection. Yes, these three main points. This first. And second, what three main values that you want to develop in your students, or you don't want to develop any values? Students have to find, to discover them in themselves through a democratic environment, yes, through community. Do you understand me?
Yeah, I understand. It's a good question.
Okay.
The first one, yes, I would say that living together, the community, and some of those things that you say are very important. But I also see, and it would be interesting to make you, for example, listen to the folk schools in America that are developing very much right now. And they have different, they don't always live together. Maybe it's a village that meet and have classes, or so we don't have to have exactly the way the Norwegian schools are. I'm talking from the Norwegian schools, but I can see the same. I could say that in Sweden, I know Sergei has met the Swedish schools, and some of you others too, Anastasia and Olga, I'm sure. And they have, you can do the secondary education in the folk high schools. And we always discuss, between Norway and Denmark and Sweden, is this a good folk high schools? And I think it is. But it would be a little difference. It would be that they don't have exactly grades. They have like 4 levels they can reach, but the basic principles of dialogue, of listening, is there. But they have to go through a more, clear course. So folk high school pedagogy, I think, can come in many situations and in many environments. And that's one of the most exciting things with the global fellowship, because you can see like on Haiti, there is a man who travels around and meets leaders in different villages. And his basic ideas are folk high school pedagogy, but it's not, you wouldn't, he works in different settings. So I'm talking about the setting in Norway, and I think when Sergei starts the folk high school, it will be somewhat like that, isn't it? It's pretty much like the Scandinavian one, Sergei. It is. That's what I understand when I read about it. But it could be the other ways too, and I think the basic pedagogical principles are you can use in other ways. And then you asked about the values, and I'm glad that you did that, because I think the values that we want to give on are real. That's why the embodied values are so important to me, because that's where we say, this is how I would see democracy. And also I come from a school that has a religious background, so that's why religion is kind of a part, because for me it was so important when I wrote these things that the schools that has a religious background, that they are democratic, and that they are not monological, but dialogical, because religion, I think you all know, very easily becomes monological and very, reproductive learning. And I wanted to show that, and that these students, and my experience is also that these students can actually, be free to think themselves, because like take the example of religion. I would say, don't believe like I do. Find your own way of thinking about this. Believe or not believe, you know, what you want to do, but do it democratically. And I would stand, there is actually a Muslim folk high school in Kista outside of Stockholm. And some would say, but a Muslim, can they be folk high school? Yes, they stand for a democratic way of standing for Muslim values. And I think for us to make these people a part of our society, that's really important. And that's kind of the work of the democratization of the folk high schools today. So religion would be one way of showing the values, because we are saying that you can have all the values that are fitted within a democratic society, a democratic thinking, a dialogic pedagogy. They can be folk high school values. But I would say that there are also value bases that a folk high school cannot have, because there are values that I would say doesn't fit in that, but that can be discussed. And that's a discussion that we have all the time. But the schools in Norway have different value bases. There are social democratic folk high schools, there are non-religious, there are religious, there are schools that are, there's a school in Iceland, I love that one, that's feministic anarchistic artist school, where they do very, very creative artist work. And it's, I don't think many of us would fit in there, maybe some, but it's a very, I think, special community. But I think it's beautiful, and it's in the framework of a democratic process. Did I answer your question, Julia?
Владислав Бережний. Питання від Владислава.
Добрий день, чути мене? Johan,
I can hear you.
do you hear me? Yeah, very good. So I have written it, but yes, I would have pleasure to talk. This is the question about the legacy. We have a very wide network of schools throughout the country, and yes, we have pedagogical community. We have trainers by their education, trainers by their inspiration. A lot of courses can be conducted in these schools after the learning period, learning time finishes in the second half of the day. So we are quite interested in learning all over the country. I hear examples when kids and adults go to paint, to sing, to dance, and to study some other important things for their work, like languages, programming, etc. So the question is really how to transform this wide network of people who study and teach into this democracy movement, how to spread this fire through the land. What was maybe some interesting lessons from your experience, from Scandinavian experience, how it inspired people to transform their classes into this community building and democracy creating?
That's a very good question, Vladislav, and I'm kind of humble in answering it, because I think that's one of the things that we have to find in each situation. Like what we are doing now, we couldn't have done that in the 19th century. He couldn't sit online and talk to people in the other end of Europe. So we have new possibilities today, and we have new ways of doing things. So I think online courses is fantastic. This is really great. I have been trying. I worked on starting an international course in folk high school pedagogy at my university. There's also a question online from in the chat. That's the one you wrote, Vladislav, about the teaching. So it would be I would be very interested in working on that and trying to make that a course for teachers in Ukraine who wanted to learn more about folk high school pedagogy. That is one way to go. The course now had a payment, but the Nordic folk high school organizations were willing to support that payment. So we had a group of Ukraine students that were going to be able to take the course. Unfortunately, the bureaucracy in my university and the ones who were going to do where you could sign up for the course became so complicated that I think Sergey were there and some others, and it was almost ununderstandable. So I'm working on my university to make that more possible, and I hope we can do that again, because I think teaching communities and taking courses and classes is important. I think literature is important, reading. So the translation work we are doing now, and where this book is one of the first, is I think really important. But I think all of you have ideas that I don't have that can be, because you know the situation, you know the network, you know what would engage these people and how we could meet their needs. So I would be very much willing to listen, to hear more, and to serve in that as a capacity in that process.
Thank you. Thank you.
Johan, can I add something
Yes.
to this topic? Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I will be in Ukrainian. Друзі, перш за все, в минулому році Йохан, там у нього була велика битва з адміністрацією свого університету про те, щоб максимально спростити формальні вимоги для українських студентів. Питання касалось формального підтвердження уровня B1 з англійської мови, фінансових питань там і багато іншого. Але, знаєте, скандинавське суспільство дуже любить правила, тому їм складно відмовлятися від цих правил. Але після того, що не вийшло там вирішити це питання в університеті, Йохан запропонував оцей рух, тобто рухатись майстер-класами, які будуть розкривати цю сутність. Це перше. Друге, ми десь рік тому робили план роботи в МБ на майбутнє. Це я вже удочку закидаю на кінець нашого заходу. І ми там собі поставили завдання розвитку інфраструктури для фольбільдингу. Під інфраструктурою мається у увазі не тільки стіни, а і створення кодексу знань, і підготовка вчителів нашими скандинавськими партнерами. Бо ви розумієте, що це та справа, яку по книжках і навіть по майстер-класах не вивчиш. Треба проживати це разом з вчителями скандинавськими в скандинавських школах, щоб потім повертатись і тут робити свою версію цього, але з урахуванням цього досвіду. І зараз є таке коло партнерів в Скандинавії, які підтримали Йохана, і є ідеї, як рухатись далі. Шведська організація, яка допомагає народним вищим школам, подала аплікацію на те, щоб прийняти 10 чоловік з України на такий курс, який дасть можливість побувати в народних вищих школах, тиждень попрацювати, повернутися з цим, відпрацювати в Україні і потім завершити через півроку-рік цей процес знову в Скандинавії в своїх народних школах. Ми чекаємо результатів. Ми не закінчили спілкування з Лінчопінським університетом. Там Даніель Блат захищає дисертацію, тому трошки відклали це спілкування по цих питаннях. Є інші проекти, які зараз в розробці, які дадуть можливість цей кодекс знань створити і перші групи отримати тих, хто піде, отримає цей досвід роботи і співнавчання в скандинавських школах і повернеться для роботи в Україну. Тому доєднуйтесь до мережі, в жовтні, в другій половині буде відкритий захід. Це я ще не узгодив з партнерами, але бачу там вікно у себе в календарі, де ми дуже громко крикнемо, що нам потрібна допомога. Тому доєднуйтесь. Дякую. Вибачте, що забрав трохи часу.
Дякую.
Лена Точиліну, дайте слово Точиліну, дайте слово Лені.
Ой, дайте, будь ласка, а мене чути?
Так.
Да? О, супер. А можна я рідною мовою англійською? Johan, I have a question about how you teach actually democracy, because I've spent, I think, in overall like 5 months in various folk high schools in Denmark. I do understand that there might be differences between Denmark, Norway, and, well, there should be at least some. But like I witnessed that there was a major focus, especially in the first couple of months, on actually helping these very young people who were sometimes 17, 18, 19-year-olds to learn basic adult rules, how to behave in a society of adults, like you need to clean after yourselves, you need to bring glasses to an ashtray, whatever. And I was like, okay, where's democracy? When does democracy come? Because for me, it was like a kindergarten to school to adult life. But there should be democracy, right? So if you could give us like a few examples, which of those methods actually teach it, I would really appreciate. Thank you.
I think one of the strengths of the folk high schools, also because there's, even if there is a curriculum like in the Swedish ones, or actually in some of the Danish ones has a little bit of that too, they are still meeting each student where they are. So some students, like you say, might have the great challenge of just understanding your mother is not here anymore. You actually have to do the dishes. You have to clean your room. I remember I was the main contact for a corridor or a part of the living, where 8 students live together. And the 2 guys from the football class, they would just drop their training clothes in the hallway and try to use the same the next day. And the girls said, no way, I'm not living at this corner.
I started having flashbacks. Yeah.
But then the same students might, come with me to Moldova. They might go visiting a refugee camp, a local refugee camp. They might work with organizing children events. And so it's not like they're locked in one level. I think they can be in several places at once. And that's why I think the non-coherence of democracy learning is so important, because the same student that is very immature in one place can show really much maturity in another place. Like we had handicapped students in my school with mental disabilities, and we had contact students for them. And one or two of those guys who were really, immature when they dropped their clothes, they would be fantastic in contact with a Down syndrome student, and they would learn a lot about, being in the other and the basic philosophy that we are talking about in that relationship. So we are saying sometimes that we don't teach subjects, we teach through subjects. The subjects are something that is the framework, and those are important, but the main idea is through those subjects, we all the time try to push democracy. We all the time to push respect for the other, and the learning happens in many places. And that's why I agree with you in a sense, Elena, that it's hard to pinpoint. And it's always very important to work on the mindset of the teachers. There also was a question that I didn't answer about who can teach on the folk high schools. What do we look for competence? That's very interesting, because the book we just did had 3 parts about the Nordic folk high school teacher: identity, work, and education. And the education is very different. In Denmark, only 25% have formal education, formal teachers' education, of those who teach in the folk high schools, because they have so many specialized subjects, and also because the Danish folk high schools are a little bit cautious about their contact with academia. So when I come there, I have to make them believe that I actually am a folk high school person, even though I work in a university, because they don't really trust me. But in Sweden, it's a whole other level of, formal education among the folk high school teachers. So there is a discussion, and like Sergey said, can you learn this by not being there? I at least think that you can learn parts of it through university education, but I also think that it's important, good to experience it, or you should experience it.
Даніл, можна попросити прочитати питання від Юрія в чаті якраз? І перекласти Йохана.
And that's also a very good question. Traditionally, there has been a 16-year-old limits in some schools and 18-year in others. Many schools have moved up to 18. I think also that democratic education is easier in the end of your teenage years. But we also have actually a folk high school for pensioners, for people that are pensioned, that are like in the 60s. And we have, that's just one school. And we have schools in Denmark that are the efterskole, that are the after school, where you can do your secondary education. So you can be like 15 and go to a school that has a Grundtvigian basic idea. So the schools connected to the folk high schools have a wide range of age, but the most usual in Scandinavia today is students just around the age of 20, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. And in Norway, you get state support, special funding from the state, if you do it when they are the 3 years after you leave your secondary education, gymnasium education.
Наступне питання, будь ласка, можна попросити перекласти для Йохана?
Юра?
The studies conducted in English you can find, for example, on my ResearchGate page, but I will also, I could make a list for you to where you can download many of the online resources in English. You were asking about how they are, who owns, the ownership of the schools are very local. They are local units, and they are connected very loosely through a national organization. The national organizations are very important. I have worked a lot with the national organizations because they connect the schools, but the schools are actually their own, they have their own ownership, which is very good because they can develop their own ideas, and that's kind of the basic idea with folk high school pedagogy, or folk high schools, especially in Denmark and Norway. But at the same time, they're very vulnerable. And I know schools that 1 or 2 years didn't get students enough, and then they had to close the school because they're just on the limit of managing their economy, many of the schools. So we're very vulnerable. I know in Sweden there has been a big discussion about the support for folkbildning, and Sverigedemokraterna, one of the parties, are very critical. In Norway also, the populist right-wing party has questioned the financing of folk high schools. They wanted to take down 200 million kroner, and that would mean that we would close half of the schools. So it's very vulnerable. It's vulnerable schools, and that's also why research is important to protect these schools.
Наступне питання перекладаєш.
Oh, yes. This is also a very good question. And when you're 90 years old, you want to explore life. So you want to try out things, drugs and alcohol and partying. And of course, we have to limit the room that these things take in the school. It can't be just a concert conference, a party for the whole time. So we're pretty strict. My school was very strict with drugs and alcohol. Also because we don't want to have students learn to use drugs in a school. That's very, very, very important. So that's one area. Otherwise, the schools can be quite different. Also in that area, the schools are different. And I know Danish schools that have a bar in their school, which would be very shocking for a Norwegian school to have. So the traditions are different, but absolutely there are rules and there are limitations to what you can do. Also, of course, all kind of putting people down, aggressiveness, fighting, just the things that are normal not to do, you can't do in a school. So there are many things like that. But I think the students experience a great freedom because we want to minimize the rules, and we want the rules to be something that we decide together with the students as much as possible. That's one of the basic principles. We want them to feel that they have ownership. So even the rule about alcohol, which maybe was one that was hard to accept for the student, we could make them understand that actually if that happens, if we start that here, it's hard to limit it, and maybe somebody will get hurt or something will, a girl will be molested in the city or something. So we really don't want that to happen, and they could understand that. So I think it worked to make them understand that that's an important part of a year like this. But I said these kind of rules are very different.
Thank you. Ольга?
Ольга із Стокгольма задає питання Йохану із Стокгольма.
Добрий вечір. Я не задаю питання Йохану. До речі, його ім'я произноситься по-шведськи Юхан через У. Так, Юхан? Я хочу додати кілька коментарів. І не знаю, чи Юхан буде зі мною згоден. Я живу в Швеції 33 роки, я приїхала з Дніпра, тоді ще був Дніпропетровськ, і це був Радянський Союз. І я працюю в системі, яка сестринська система до народних вищих школ, це студія Фербундет. Студія Фербундет Вуксенскулян. У нас також фолькбільдинг, тобто народна освіта, але в таких більш короткочасних курсах це навчальні гуртки, так? А не курси длиною півроку чи рік. Тому в нас це все коротше. Але я хотіла відповісти на запитання Єлени щодо демократії в Швеції. Я так думаю, ви вибачте мене, якщо я перейду на російську мову, мені дуже важко, Is it okay to speak Russian? You can translate me to Ukrainian if you want. В Швеции вообще демократия... Ага, окей. But Johan cannot hear me, I understand.
I can hear you. Yes, I can.
Окей. В Швеции демократию преподают, начиная с садиков, с садочков. Так, с садиков, со школ, потому что везде есть демократический метод обсуждения всех вопросов, даже с маленькими детьми. Так, и демократией пропитано все общество.
I don't hear you, Daniel.
Так, так,
Okay,
трошки складно,
thank you.
тому
Okay,
що
that's okay.
дві мови. И поэтому я так думаю, когда люди попадают в народные школы, им не так трудно эту демократию на себя применить, потому что они растут в обществе, которое насквозь пропитано демократией. Демократичные выборы, демократичная прозрачная система обсуждения всех вопросов, демократичная система даже в доме, где вы живете. Да, все эти кооперативы, все прозрачно обсуждается. То есть, я думаю, в народных школах больше тебе дают свободу почувствовать себя самим собой. Поэтому Лена, может быть, не так ощутила, а когда ж тут преподадут демократию? Потому что она в них сидит, эта демократия, с самого раннего возраста.
Угу.
И у них, наоборот, есть проблема. У них проблема – это зажатости. Да, зажатости, что ты не должен сильно показывать свои чувства, что, да, что ты должен быть не очень видимым, не высовываться. И у них очень сильная зажатость.
Абсолютно точно.
И поэтому они, наоборот, должны вот в этих школах, как я не работала в таких школах, я чуть-чуть в одной занималась, но это было мало. Они пытаются раскрепостить людей. Да, и, собственно, поэтому чуть-чуть проблемы Украины, где нам нужно вот эту демократию воспитывать. И проблема Швеции, где у них демократия есть, но нет, ну да, такой свободы самовыражения и уверенности в этом самовыражении. У нас чуть-чуть разные задачи, что нам нужно воспитывать. Но это мое личное мнение. Так що дякую за те, що вислухали. І Настя, ти теж жила в Швеції досить довго. Ти можеш також сказати, чи я права, чи не права.
Друзі, я перепрошую. Гарно, Оля, що ти наприкінці сказала, що це твоя точка зору. Бо, знаєш, тут маю іншу точку зору. Стосовно того, заметне чи незаметне. Тут працюють у нас інструктори з рятувальної служби пожежної зі Швеції. Так вони коли заходять в аудиторію, всі в татуюваннях, і коли задаєш питання, там обстрілюють, ти підеш там, ну, в якесь місце, він кажуть, так а що, я не ви? І йде з усіма. І коли розповідає якісь історії, може як людина і заплакати, і все. Ну, трошки інші шведи, мабуть, тобі зустрічались, і мені зустрічались.
І тобі зустрічались інші шведи.
Да. Тому так. А ще одне питання. Ну, для мене питання не в тому, як українцю навчитись демократії в Швеції. Для мене питання в тому, як в Україні зробити інститут, і це, до речі, дуже важливий поінт в статті Йохана і Етьєна Венгера, які це питання задають, якою має бути інституція освітня, яка дасть можливість оцим вільним людям, про те, що Йохан казав на початку свого виступу, з'явитись і вільному суспільству. Оце для мене виклик, розумієш? А то, що в Швеції, якщо туди приїхати і піти навчатись у всі шведські інституції, то дуже швидко станеш демократичним, я майже не сумніваюся. Для мене більше питань, як в нашому середовищі, тим більше в контексті війни, травмованості і всього іншого, створити ці умови безпеки, безпечні умови, про які казав Йохан, які є важливою частиною методології цих інституцій. От для мене виклик, розумієш? А то, що в Швеції, то і так зрозуміло. Друзі, я дуже вдячний всім. До речі, ми з Йоханом домовлялись, що він виступає 25 хвилин, а потім ми з вами розмовляємо десь там по якихось кабінетах. Та він відпочиває 40 хвилин, і після цього ще там 10 хвилин завершає весь цей вечір. Він проговорив весь вечір завдяки нам, за те, що ми такі дисципліновані, всі домовленості виконали. Але я думаю, що це теж трохи в дусі народних вищих школ, коли ми віддаємо пріоритет процесу, а не там тому, що ми там напланували спочатку. В будь-якому випадку я дуже вдячний Йохану Льовґрену за те, що він робить. Друже, ти в моєму серці будеш назавжди. Дякую тобі дуже за це. І ще, друзі, я хотів подякувати людям, які приклали титанічні зусилля для того, щоб це відбулося на українській стороні. Це Юра Пивоваренко і Ірина Шарпіла. По-перше, вони переклали цю статтю, і по-друге, вони на себе взяли всі зусилля по організації цього першого семінару. Я дуже вдячний за це. І дуже вдячний всім нашим друзям і колегам на скандинавській стороні, які зараз прикладають титанічні зусилля для того, щоб цей рух розвивався в Україні. Перш за все, Анастасії Некрасової. Настя, дякую дуже. Низький уклін за все, що робиш. Дякую дуже. Оля Біба. Оля, до речі, теж є проекти, які орієнтовані на розвиток руху гуртів самоосвіти. Тому, друзі, дякую. Без вас би це не відбулося. Я не знаю, Іра майстер тут чи ні, але це ще одна людина дуже потужна, яка підтримує всю цю історію. Лена Тичина, яка на собі винесла перебування в 3 народних школах. Дякую всім, друзі. Ми зробили величезний крок. Йохане, дякую дуже. Ти відкрив двері. Інші двері в цей чудовий світ. Спасибі тобі велике.
And the seminar that you mentioned there, the Global Network will organize a seminar on the 10th of October. So if we could send out that to those who were here today and to other parts of the network. And then we will, unfortunately, we can't do the simultaneous translation there, but those of you who want to and can take part in English, and you don't need to talk much, you can listen and you can say what you want, but it's open for all of you. We will work on the same concepts, and it will be based on the translation to Ukrainian and on the situation and on your experience. So it would be very interesting, I think. And as I said, we learn so much by seeing how this is the complications and the possibilities in different settings. So it would be a great honor for us if you wanted to take part in that seminar. So we'll come back with a link where you can join or register for the seminar. And we will, I think, limit the amount of people so that are not from Ukraine. So we will have a group about 30 or 40 or 50 like today that can talk together, and maybe we will have time to Sergey that time for breakout rooms too. So I hope so.
From which countries do you know? Johan?
Oh wow! Of course, the Scandinavian countries. We have had parts from all over India, Japan, America, South America. We have African. Almost. I mean, all around the globe, people have taken parts in these seminars. I don't know who would meet now, but we have had the seminars conducted by the global network of folk high school researchers. Sergey has been a part of those. Has been gathering maybe from 80 to 100 people each time, from literally from all over the globe that are interested in folk high school pedagogy. And I would say that some of those are in very tight situations, even if they're not in an actual war situations like in Ukraine. They are very hard, held back by their government situations, and so it's an interesting dialogue, I think, for everybody. But I'm sorry that we can't sufficiently do the we'll talk about that. Maybe we could do the translation too, but we'll come back to that. But we will announce it and give you a link to the 10th of October. And maybe a little bit earlier, because some of the people around the globe will be sleeping at this time. So it's we have to adjust it so that the people can have a reasonable. Our colleague in India is right now in the middle of the night, so it will be very light for him.
Добре, тоді ще пару заключних слів. Друзі, ми продовжуємо цю серію семінарів. Наступний вебінар ми плануємо на 25 жовтня. Для цього ми почнемо перекладати наступну книжку «Бери відповідальність». І нам потрібна буде допомога в перекладі з англійської на українську. Тож, хто з вас вміє перекладати, запрошуємо, допомагайте нам в цьому, тому що інакше не хочеться ризикувати і перевантажуватись. Будь ласка, долучайтеся до нас, до перекладу. І ще один момент, який би я хотів сказати, це, знову ж таки, ви можете долучатись до нас як члени організації, разом з цим бути більш поінформованими, більше спілкуватися з нами, більше зануритись глибше в те, що ми робимо, і сприяти поширенню цього руху в Україні різними способами, не лише перекладом. Для цього можна на сайті зайти в розділ «Взяти участь» і клікнути «Членство в громадській організації», і там ви знайдете, як до нас долучитися. І, звичайно, слідкуйте за нашими соцмережами в Телеграмі, в Фейсбуку. Якщо у вас є питання, пишіть нам на email bildung@gmail.com, і таким чином будемо на зв'язку. Можете писати нам питання, долучайтеся до нас. І, до речі, в нас є YouTube-канал, на YouTube-каналі є відеозапис, на якому ми розповіли про стратегію запровадження руху народних шкіл в Україні. Також, просто щоб ви були в курсі і подивилися, дізналися, як ми це плануємо робити. На цьому все. Так, дякую за участь. Дуже дякую вам. На сьогодні я після цього розішлю форму зворотнього зв'язку, де ви зможете поділитися зворотнім зв'язком з нами, щоб ми краще зробили наступні заходи. І Сергій хоче сказати слово. Так.
Да, друзі, я там бачив ще питання, на які ми не відповіли, принаймні Лена Денисенко. Дивіться, є базові питання, про які вже написані статті, там є переклади статей, і ми можемо просто цим відповісти на ці запитання. Але в будь-якому випадку, якщо у вас залишились запитання, які ви не задали, будь ласка, вишліть Юрі, ми подумаємо, як організувати переклад, і щоб Йохан мог долучитись до відповіді на ці запитання. Дякую дуже. І окремо дякую Даніелю Литовченка. Даніел, дякую дуже за вашу роботу. Це шалений труд, 3 години синхронно. Дуже дякуємо за це. Друзі, спасибі велике і до побачення. Thank you very much, Johan. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Johan, thank you.
I was saying, Daniel, you did a fantastic job.